Thank you for bringing me down. This is really going to be fun. I'm planning on doing two open bowls tonight, one with a cut rim on it and one with a natural edge. I know that my specialty is hollow turnings, but there really isn't time in an event like this to do both. And I think it's really important, meaning a hollow turning and an open bowl. I think it's really important to view open bowls. I love open bowls, I just don't make them for a living. But the methods of making open bowls, I think, are still classic and really wonderful. I'll be dealing with it a little bit differently, as you might expect, in the manner in which I use my gouge on the different areas, the rims in particular, and some backward slicing and backward scraping cuts that if you're not well adversed at turning will probably confuse you, and that's good. It's okay to be confused. I've been confused for decades. But at any rate, I'm gonna blast through this first one and do a cut rimmed bowl, and then I'll be talking about the process, of course, as I go along and describing the cuts that I'm doing. And the camera, can we have a hand for our cameraman, please? He's the real workhorse here tonight. I'm trying to keep track of where I am and not get hit, in other words. And then we'll take a break after that, and a quick break, because I want to then turn another one, and it's fairly sizable material, so meaning I have to move a lot of material to get down. So I won't be doing much talking during the second bowl. I'd rather just turn and then just describe the cuts as I'm going. You'll have heard enough of me for the first bowl that you don't need it on the second. So this is ash that I took down just last week in Pennsylvania. The tree had died, and as are all the other ash trees on my property going to die with the emerald ash borer. But I just snagged it. It is green, but ash, as you probably know, doesn't hold very much moisture in it anyway. Even when the sap is running in the spring and this early summer, it's still really dry. I think probably only around 25 to 30%, give or take your climate and the species that you're working with. And so it's also a grainy wood, like oaks would be. And so the nice, wonderful, luscious, smooth surface that I could get on a maple or a birch, for instance, will be more like textured sandpaper on the ash. And then, of course, when you take your sandpaper to it, it all equals out into a nice piece at the end. So I have simply cut the log in half, obviously, trimmed the four corners off with the chainsaw so I could get it in my truck in a hurry yesterday morning. And I don't use a bandsaw for work like this for a couple reasons. One is I don't want to be confined to a particular circle, but I might change my mind and alter the position of it at a later time. But for the safety point of view, I don't like to cut green wood on a bandsaw anyway, because you can become overconfident, and then you get thicker and thicker and thicker, and one of those times you're going to get the band stuck in there and it's going to break, and all sorts of crazy things happen that are not very comfortable. But the other thing is that when you have bark on a material like this, there's got to be a lot of dust in there that's going to dull the band on your bandsaw, and that's really tragic, because then you can really only have to go and buy a new one, unless you want to spend a week sharpening your own bandsaw blades. But the final reason is I turn a lot of spalted material. And the black zone lines in spalted wood are described basically as a mycelium, as a compound, and it's like turning charcoal, and it will take the band right off of anything, your chainsaw, your bandsaw, your special tools, and everything else. So when I'm doing spalted materials, when I'm turning spalted materials, I'm just sure at the very beginning, before I even start out, I commit myself to sharpening a lot on my gouge in order to be able to continue to keep a good edge on it and make it work through. So let's get started here. The first thing I want to do is, I just threw this up here a little while ago, and I think I got lucky, but I'm going to compare things so I can get it balanced. So this plane here on the end grain and this plane here on the end grain on this side, let's just see how they come about. They're right on target, so I got lucky there. The outside, the curve could be different, but I'm on the pit there, and I'm about ½ an inch too high here, so I'm going to drop it by ¼ inch just to get that balanced. And then if I have a high spot on this surface here, which I do right there, and it's high by about 3/8 of an inch, I'm just going to drop it in the tailstock by about 3/16. Not very much. And fundamentally, that puts that plane vertical. Now, I haven't designed the bowl yet. I haven't thought about grain patterns or anything else. I'm just getting it balanced so that when I do turn the thing on, it doesn't walk the blade around the road. And I know that those of you who have smaller scale machines know exactly what I mean. So the first thing I do is start trimming in order to be able to make this piece more manageable. And I'm using a bicycle glove, which has pads in it for your hand here. And whatever glove you use, cut the fingers off. From a safety point of view, never use a work glove because eventually a work glove gets sloppy on your hand. The fingers tend to get filled with shavings or dust, and you're working on your piece, and all of a sudden the extra part out here gets stuck between the spinning wood and the tool rest, and it's probably not a lot of fun. Okay, make sure everything's tight, the speed is down. And run. Now I have set the tool rest at a fairly steep angle here, but not straight across. Because if I put the tool rest straight across, I know the grain is running this direction at me, and there's no way I can come to the material going left or right, my left or my right, without the blade pointing directly into the end grain, so it would make a head-on collision. So I want to trim this off at a very acute angle, so it's like whittling in effect. And I can show you a perfect example for those of you who are just kind of getting started in turning. If I take this stick, think of yourself as a kid, and I start working down that surface like that, it's perfect. It works nicely. The moment I come back this direction, the blade gets stuck in the wood, and that's exactly what's going on here. In this case, the handle's pointing at me. If I come this direction, everything works nice. If I go that direction, I get stuck in the wood. The nice thing about wood itself, however, is that wood tells you which way it doesn't like. So if you're going in at this direction here and it's whacking around at you, simply turn around and go the other way, and it'll be very, very kind to you. David, all right.
David,
yes, sir.
Do we know what belt setting you were?
I changed it, yeah. It was on the high speed for spindle turning, and I put it on the middle range, so I get enough torque and yet I get enough speed out of it. And then if you put your belt on the real large diameter here, then you get a lot of torque, not a huge amount of speed. So let's start by trimming. And I put the bark right next to the tool rest here so that I know where it is, because when it's spinning around, I will not be able to see it. You gonna be okay there?
I hope so.
So do I. All right, let me nibble at this. Using what I call a rough and cut. Because of all things, I want to do this safely and in a manageable way. This one you said is coming. Yeah. Does it come down the other side?
No.
It just stays there. Well, it's okay. We'll work with it. Now, the roughing cut is designed to do exactly what it sounds like. Take care of the rough stuff. And in this case, what I'm doing is bringing the tool in horizontally to the material with a 45-degree angle across the top of the flutes. Let me get my pencil here so I can illustrate that. A little bit that way, like so. And what that does is it elevates this lower edge in an upward pointing direction so that when the wood is coming down, it engages that edge like a cutting device. If I roll the edge down like so, then it would engage the edge like a scraper, and that's one of the 5 cuts also, and I won't use it just yet. The other nice thing I like about the roughing cut, am I too loud on this? Okay. is that the roughing cut, by using the tool horizontally, it drives all the force into the tool rest instead of into the knee. So by the end of the day, I'm much more relaxed. So in other words, I'm not raising the tool up, the tip of the tool up like this as you would with a conventional gouge, because that drives the force into the tool rest and then into you. This way, I just let the tool rest do all of it. The other thing is, I don't tighten the quill down here, because I know that in doing that, I'll forget to tighten this. I'll just get overconfident and forget about this, and then I'll lose the pressure up against the spur, and then as I make my cuts, the spur will begin to drill a hole, and the piece will stop. So that's the reason I keep reaching over here and tightening this one. Okay. It's always fun to work with someone who's never been on a lathe before, and you stick an irregular chunk of wood like this on the lathe in front of it. Its natural form is kind of freak. But my point is, if you take a little bit of the time and work your way in the proper direction, you'll find that it's really quite fun and quite safe. Now, I've gotten the bulk of those corners off down here, so what I'm going to do now is speed up the process a little bit, not by increasing the speed of the lathe, but by raising the blade a little bit. In effect, when you run the blade horizontally to the material, you create a lot of drag into that wood. But if you start to raise it up, you reduce the drag until you get to the point, you get a much more efficient cut also. You get to the point when the blade is absolutely vertical and there's no drag at all, and then, of course, there's also no cutting. So you have to back it off a little bit to get some resistance to make the cut. But the second cut that I'm going to show you is the slicing cut, and I use it to take away the bulk of the material and to pre-shape the form. So here's the roughing cut. And all I do for the slicing cut is drop the handle about 20 to 30 so degrees. Now the jerking you're hearing is simply the matter of the tool going through end grain, face grain, end grain, face grain twice with each revolution. So as I go through the material, I'm getting that jerking. We're almost down to the end of the bar. Also notice I'm stopping short of these 8 facets and points out here. I'll do those in a slightly different way. Let me finish getting the bulk of the bark off here at the bottom first. And notice that last little bit, I rotate my body and I kind of peel out to the left. I've been coming up the fibers like this, right on tangent to them. I get to that last bit. I don't want to go into those 8 points. They're too aggressive. So I peel out like this, and then the tool actually comes very, very acute to those fibers, and it makes it much easier to cut. On top of that, I'm going to find the facet that's the lowest on this surface. Looks like that might be it. No, this one here. And that pencil line represents the largest diameter hole that I can get out of this block. So instead of coming up here and hammering myself with these 8 points, watch how easily I can take that off. starting at the pencil line and going straight up, parallel to the bed of the blade.
Feedback, speaker.
If that's me, I'll change things. I'm going to go parallel with the bed of the blade very briefly until the cut gets too thick. And then I'm going to peel out again and sneak in behind those 8 points so that they're not disrupted. Okay, so now I'm down to a cylinder with a little bit of bark left, which I'll take off later on both sides, that's no problem. So what I can do now is just look and see what I've got. And because I have a material that has a color change in the center, I might as well make use of that color change and just see how it lays out in the form. So on this side, the bottom of that color change is here. And on the opposing side, it comes down here about 3/8 of an inch lower. So my point is that when I get done with my bowl, if I have a significant color band going through it, I want to be sensitive to that color band, because if I don't put it absolutely parallel with the foot of the bowl, it'll look a little bit like this. And it's kind of like the painting you have at your house, you know, it's in your living room, and every time you walk by, there's something wrong with it, but you can't figure out what it is, and it's off by 1/8 of an inch. And that's what's happening here, is that your sense of visual order would be disrupted just slightly, and it never would quite sit too well with you. But I can change that. I can move this back this way and drop this down that way if I go half the distance in the tailstop. So if I know that it's, say, 3/8 of an inch, I'm going to move it up 3/16 in the tailstop. Or in this case, I'll move it down because it's easier that way. Well, it's easier to drop something than to raise it anyway. See if we can get about 3/16 in here. And check it again. So I'm here on this side, and I'm almost right on it. I'm about a 1/16 of an inch off. We'll allow for that. So I'll then recut this area here. And you'll notice there's no real difference in the diameter of the bowl because I haven't changed anything in dispersing. I've just readjusted the bottom region here. So the point of all this is that before I commit to a faceplate or a glue block or a chuck, what I'm doing is I'm basically arranging the grain of my bowl, what's going to end up in my final bowl, to my own personal liking. And when I get into doing hollow forms, it's even more significant because obviously I have a larger surface to play with. A lot of times, if I have the pith going straight through an object, for instance, it's nice to make hollow forms out of small pieces. What's your name again? Excuse me. Yeah.
Lars.
Yeah, Lars has a very large sphere back here, which is quite nice. You ought to take a look at it earlier. But my point is that when I'm making small hollow forms with the pith going through it, I can arrange the location of that pith so it fills the shape after the object has distorted from the green to the dry. And in some cases, I've even put the pith going diagonally through the form to really give it a strange distortion when it's done. All sorts of ways one can play around with that. But in this case, I'm going to leave the grain as it is now, and I'm going to flatten out the bottom to receive a chuck. That diameter.
I'm not sure what's on. Can you try the microphone?
A little higher.
And then it won't need to be a sensitive. Right?
Bring it up in here.
Try that. And then cut down on.
Let me cut down on the speaker first. Okay, oops, let me cut down a little bit more. If I cut down that far, nothing happens. If I bring it up to here, is something happens?
Yeah,
That's good. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Let's give that a whirl. Whirl. We'll try that. All right, let me flatten it out. And I'm going to check that diameter against the jaws of the chuck, just to see how close I am. Okay, I can knock that down a little bit. So I'll turn the spigot here. Check it again just to be sure. I'm breathing into this thing.
Yeah.
That's not a good thing. Well, it can go even smaller. Wow. I'm not used to those smaller jaws. One more time. Let's hear it. Don't know what's happened. But I know it's hard on your ears. Okay, that's good. Can you hear me now? All right, let me finish off this base down in here.
David, could you move,
Yeah.
Can you move the handle on the quill?
Can
You're not using the, can you move the handle on the quill? It's right in the...
The black,
This?
yeah, just pivot it. There you go. Thank
Gotcha.
you.
Oh, right. Good point. Okay, what I did when I formed the spigot for the chuck is I came in here with the tip of the tool, and at the very end I dropped it so that the angle of the bevel to the angle of the blade itself is basically 90 degrees. If it didn't give me a perfect registration in here, then I would trim that off with a parting tool or a skew used on its side like a scraper and make sure that that's accurate down in there. Because I want to make certain that my jaws grab appropriately down in that area. If they don't, I'll redo it, but it's fine now. Okay. Now, the reason I'm using a chuck this time, and I'm using fairly large jaws. These are the number 3 jaws. At home, I have the number 4s, and the reason I go so large is that almost everywhere I go, I get into a situation where people are using chucks and they're only using the number 2 jaws that came with the chucks when they purchased them. And they're basically too small, is what I'm getting at. The larger diameter, the better. In fact, I would ordinarily go with the number 4s to really get out there. It's a similar concept that if you have faceplate with screws on it, I go to a large diameter faceplate, like a 6-inch faceplate, and I put the screws way out in the perimeter of this faceplate, not down in the center. Because I want to make certain that the shape of the form can come down and actually go inside those screws and drop down in. So that in effect, if I had a bowl that came down and had a little foot on it, I could put the foot inside the screws of the faceplate or inside the jaws of the chuck itself. And that way I could make use of the entire height of the form that I'm working with. The difficulty with the number 2 jaws, outside of the obvious, is that they're too small, is that when you put a real gouge onto the wood and make, substantial cuts with it, you're going to snap the spigot right off, if not pull it out of the chuck itself. Plus that, when you get to larger scale, the vibration factor is huge with a small chuck. The idea is you're trying to transfer the mass of the headstock directly to the object without much interruption in order to prevent vibration on the surface of the form. Well, if you can prevent vibration on the surface of your form, you just minimized your sanding by about 50%. So it's worth it going to a larger unit. Now, the problem with the early days in wood turning was that they only had small jaws. And they only, when they came out of '86 with Nova, with the first chucks, they only had small jaws at that time. And faceplates, every time you buy a lathe, they get a nice faceplate with it. The problem is it was only 3 inches in diameter, so you stuck your screws right in the bottom of your forms, and that's where we came up with that whole business about green felt on the bottom there. It was there to cover up the screw holes, you see. So there are a few things to do with wood turning, not a whole lot, but there are a few. And one of them is that if you can increase the diameter of the spigot or increase the diameter of your base where your faceplate, you can then take advantage of the entire height of your block without losing any, or without sacrificing any of the height. So I know a lot of you are buying materials on the net, or you're buying out of trade shows or something that costs money. You don't want to waste it. The wood, money you're going to waste anyway, just buy a cup of coffee. You know, but anyway, that's my little spiel on chucks and why I'm using a larger scale chuck. So let me, again, from the tree down to the finished object, let me start trimming, reducing by removing things that I know I don't want. And in this case, I know I don't want the chainsawed surface on this form. So I'm going to start there and knock it down to where I'm going to end up with the final rim of the bowl, which will probably be, usually I take it about 3/4 of an inch below the pith. Well, the pith's already cut out of here. Most of it's in that other block that I brought. So I'm just going to trim this down and get it even. Then I'm going to come down and go to the bottom, and I'm going to cut up from the chuck down here and form the base cut, and then I'll actually be able to shape the bowl between the top and the bottom of the form. But I'm not designing it yet. I'm still just developing a form of some kind. Okay. Now with the tailstock always in position, I should be able to speed this up a little bit. And I'll get rid of that extra weight here. By trimming off. Take the ring down to about there. I don't know if you've been able to notice that, or are interested in looking, but my back hand is not locked on this gouge. In fact, it's generally open, even when I'm taking heavy cuts in the front. In part, I'm creating a triangle, like an equilateral triangle of support, and I'm keeping that handle against my hip. But I don't have to grip it. In fact, I don't grip the top of the shaft very much either. I just hold it and support it in some form while I'm making the cuts. The angle is important, but the key here is the body, and getting the handle against the body constantly, so you're not out like this working like so, or you're unsupported in the back and you can't really control the cut very effectively. One of the keys that I use in working with students is to try and counteract the death grip that you get on tools when you're first starting out. Oh boy. And one way to do that is square yourself off, lock your knees, grab the gouge from and the back, and just hold it as tightly as you possibly can. And then relax your hands to the point where you're almost dropping it. And then do that several times again. And then when you go through the cuts, do it the same way. Start to cut out and really grip the tool in a death grip type, and then start relaxing your hands, and you'll discover how much muscle you actually need to use on the tool for each specific cut that you're doing. And you will thank yourself at the end of the day for not being totally fatigued in your forearms. We'll do other things as well here in a little while in that same department, but that's one of the keys to staying relaxed when you're turning, is to get rid of that depth grip by trying to create it and then finding out what you actually need to make the cuts you're after. Okay, now I'm going to come down here and form the base cut. And you won't be able to see this from there, but unless you can get behind me.
Don't go falling over.
Throwing shadings in your face.
Go for it.
Yeah, that's fairly good. I'm going to do it in a series of cuts, going up like that and then out like this at the wall. In the slicing position. So up and out. And one more. The idea behind the base cut is that I want to be able to read the curve of the form coming down here and later on going through this step down here above the notch, which is in the inside edge of the jaws, and into the foot. That will then allow me to use the foot, or the spigot if you wish, for the foot of the form. If I don't make the base cut at all, I just design the form from the outside edge of the jaws up to here, what ends up happening is I limit the diameter of my foot. I have no freedom as to what shape I want it or where it's actually going to locate it, because the jaws visually are telling me that's the diameter of my foot on this bowl. And I may not want it there. In fact, most cases I don't want it there. Even a utilitarian bowl of about 11 inches diameter like this doesn't need a 6-inch diameter foot to stand up. I mean, it could be 5.5, you know, but it would still get down there. You could put a 2-inch diameter, it still wouldn't roll over. But my point is, if I make the base cut here, then later on when I put it on a jab chuck that I'll show you, it gives me the opportunity then to locate the foot wherever I like it and whatever shape I'd like it to be in. So it's a matter of not only giving me the design freedom, but also giving me full height of the object. Now what I'm going to do is to come back on the form and start actually shaping the bowl. Now that I've gotten rid of the bulk. And I've got to get rid of a little more of the sub-bark here and maybe a little bit more here, so let me cut that out. Now I'm going to resharpen the gouge and show you a couple of extra cuts here that I think are really important. Could you hand me the sharpening jig, that aluminum? Super, thank you. Now I'm going to have to shoot you an ass. Just briefly. I've been adjusted since earlier this evening to the grinder. And I made a comment that a number of years ago we had a ball-or grinder out at the Anderson Ranch in Snowmass. And when I put my jig to it like this, it came over here, and the body of the jig hit the front of this little housing down here. And I couldn't complete the process, so I couldn't get all the way down on the edge. So at lunchtime, we got a sawzall and cut the front. I ground it down with another grinder, so it looked really good. Nobody knows. Okay. Now, one of the characteristics of ash and several other materials that you'll be working with, to a smaller degree, all woods, is that you're going to get chipped fibers on opposing sides of the form. And they are formed by the tool coming this direction, the way you're supposed to go, in other words, from the foot to the rim, cutting across the fibers. The problem is when you raise an edge up, the central part does the work on the wood, but the high side of the edge is lingering out there as the tool goes by, and that high side grabs those end grain fibers on here and just pulls them away out of the material. If you've ever turned spalted wood, you know how the problem is that this exacerbates everything. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to go the wrong direction, meaning that the central part of the blade is still going to do the work, but the low side of the edge will be the last part of the edge that goes by the material, and it simply leaves the surface. So there's nothing there to drag on the wood, and it cleans those things up very, very nicely. So here's the slicing cut going backwards. Okay, those guys are gone. That's good. Now, let me see if I have any burr left on there. Yeah, I still do. So let me come back with the third cut, which is the shear scraping cut. And that is a combination, as you might imagine, of a scraping cut with the blade raised really high into a shearing position. And it's also going to go the wrong direction. So I start out as far as I can there. And then I raise the blade up very high and do it about 45, maybe 50 degrees if I can do it. And very slowly progress down the surface of the material. I also close the flute down so the flute is pointed almost directly at the wood. The top edge that's not touching the wood will be then about 1/60 of an inch away from the material. And what that does is it allows me basically just to present an edge. I mean, you don't even have to look at it as a gallery. If you have any tool that has an edge that will give you that angle that you're after. Take it nice and slow. And let's see what the finished surface looks like there. So that's about, in ash, probably 180, maybe a 220 grit surface on there, meaning that's what you could start your sanding at. If it were maple or birch, you could definitely start at 240 and work your way up to 400 and you'd be done with it. Also, I'm going to soften this rim a little bit. In fact, I think I'll put a radius on it, and I can do the same on the interior. So I'll use the same cut, the shear scraping cut, reducing the drag of the edge to the wood, and just cruising that surface. Until I get a nice little radius on it. It won't be such a hard edge to touch later on with greens or something. Okay, now we can go down inside. So let me just ask you, are there any questions at this point or confusions about these cuts that I'm making? because we work with a roughing cut and then a slicing cut and then a shear scraping cut, and to a degree a scraping cut, but I'll show you that later, in order to get to this point. The roughing cut takes care of the really bulky stuff, the irregularities in the surface. The slicing cut takes care of the shaping, the bulk of the material and shaping the form. And also the backwards slicing cut cleans the surface up. And then the shear scraping cut comes back and really finishes it off in anticipation of sanding. And speaking of that, when you're making that shear scraping cut, it's particularly good and helpful in understanding the need for having that tailstock up against here, because you don't want any vibration on here. And if I had a smaller spigot on here, I would get vibration if I didn't have the tailstock up there. And maybe a little bit even with a larger base on it. All right, let me get rid of this.
One question.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead.
What's the importance of the diameter of the gouge?
Of the diameter of the gouge, mass.
Okay.
In other words, mass behind the edge doing the work. It's a good point, because if you take, this is a 5/8 inch diameter gouge. If you take it and reduce it down to a 1/2 inch or 3/8 of an inch, you'll have the same or nearly the same edge on here in terms of length and usability, but you won't have the mass in the shaft and you'll get vibration all over the place. You get to a 3/4 inch gouge, it's really too much. And you can't get a 3/4 inch gouge that has a really good parabola in the shape of the flute. It's always a 2 straight lines like that with a radius underneath and the bottom. It's a pain in the neck to have to get a good edge on it. That gets into sharpening, which is another evening. Okay, let me get this tailstock off. And let you get reset.
David, you want a break?
How's that?
Might be a good time to break.
I'm not tired yet.
Oh, sorry.
We'll take so many breaks we won't have time to do any work. All right, let me put another edge on. Well, that right-hand side's working okay for a while. I have placed, by the way, the tool rest at a height so that when the tool is horizontal, the end of the tool cuts right in the center of the workpiece. And you can match that to your quill and your tailstock center when you put your tailstock up there. But what that does is it gives me the most amount of efficiency for the different cuts, including the fact that when I go raising the blade up for the slicing and the shear scraping cut, I'm going to be way above the center line of the workpiece. But the power that you get for the cuts that where you really need power is generated when the edge is right in the center of the workpiece. If you're below that, you'll be dragging on the wood, and it can really be quite dangerous, in fact. Okay. Now that the tool shaft will be horizontal, and it will be 45 degrees across the top of the flutes. The difference is, instead of pulling the tool towards me, as I did from the very beginning, I'm going to ratchet it in like this. So it's like jacking up a car. Here's your pivot point, and here's your power back here. And you pull the arm towards you, and the tip goes to the right. So I'm levering it into the wood in a little bit. And then goes, hold on just a second. I always like to check my chuck before I go down to the side of the form. Just to be sure. Okay. Good. So here's the roughing.
souvenirs. They're collectible.
You okay?
Yeah.
All right, here we go. Now this cut, I can't get my handle on my hip, you see, because the bed of the blade is sticking out here and bumping into me, so I have to use actual muscle for a change to it. They're only about 1/4 inch cut. They're not anything to expect. And we'll make some more roughing cuts and then I'll get down to a finishing cut fairly soon. Okay, I want to show you a little trick here. Maybe we can get that a little faster. There it is. Now, I'm going to put the gouge edge unsupported, but on an angle to the face of that surface there, and watch it kick to the left. And then I'll turn it this way and watch it kick to the right. What's happening is that as the wood comes down on the edge, it engages the high side of the tip of the tool first, of course. And it draws that tip to the right in this case. And if I turn it up like that, of course, it'll draw it to the left like that, just like the threads of a screw. And why it's important is that when you get to the last cut on your bowl, especially a thin-walled bowl, which is flexible, of course, invariably you'll get the edge in the wrong position and it wipes out your rim. And the reason is it's hitting, or you're allowing the wood to hit the high side of that radius instead of the center and the right-hand side, the low side. So what we need to do is to bring the gouge out here like this so that only the lower side or the right side engages the wood. The high side doesn't touch it. And that will allow you to enter, even in your thin-walled bowls, it will allow you to enter into that edge really, really carefully and accurately and save your piece. All right, let me get just a couple more cuts on here. Ash is pretty abrasive stuff, so just take this edge right off. Let me get a fresh rubber on the tip of this tool, and then we'll do some finishing cuts down in here, which are a little bit different than the roughing Okay, now, up to this point, I've maintained the gouge in the horizontal position here with a 45 degrees across there, and that put me on the right-hand side of the radius of the tip, and that allows me to get safely inside that rim. However, now I want to put a finish surface on this bowl in anticipation of sanding it, so I don't use the roughing cut like this. It's too aggressive. What I do instead, for the first time of all the cuts that I've showed you, is I use the bevel, but I do it in a way that allows me to use the tool horizontally now and engage, clean this up, the left-hand side of the tip for the first time. So fundamentally what's happening is here, down below that edge, the bevel on the left-hand side is exposed just enough from the sharpening jig that I've got something to ride here. So I engage the bevel, and then I rest the bevel on the wood, and then I engage the tip of the tool, the edge of the tool, and I progress on with the cut all the way down into here, riding the bevel the whole way. It's the first time I'm using the bevel with this gouge, which is a little confusing to anyone who has grown up with the British style of turning, where you ride the bevel on every cut. In this case, with this tool, with the long side of the blade on both sides of the gouge, the long edge on both sides of the gouge, I let the tool rest do the support for the cut. But on the finishing cut, on the interior of the bowl only, I need the bevel in order to be able to complete that curve. So this is what it looks like. We start out at the rim, standard roughing position, allowing it to enter into the material, giving a nice little radius to the rim. Then I'm going to bring it around and undercut that tip so that it's the rim. And automatically I am on the bevel right at that point. Oops. Do I have a piece of broken something in the rim? I'm not aware of. Sounded kind of strange. So on the bevel, bring the tool up to the horizontal, and progress forward with the cut, riding the bevel the whole way. I'm getting into the thicker material here, so I'm going to come into the roughing position, stay on the bevel, and blow that up to the full horizontal. Then I'm going to start in again with the finishing cut on the bevel, bring the edge into play, and clean this one off so I can see. Then in the thicker material, we go to the roughing position. Now that, whoop, like that, I'm going right into the end ring, so I'm hitting end ring twice with each revolution of the piece, so that's giving me the jerky.
David, are you fighting that wobble, or are you actually riding?
No, I'm letting it go for itself. I'm trying not to fight it. In other words, I have to fight it a little bit. When I come down the wall like this, I'm actually going across the fibers, but when I turn the corner, I'm going into them. And if I made a flat bottom, I'd really be going into them, so I'm giving a slight curve like so. So let me finish that up down there on the bevel. And then I'll do a little more explaining of the work. No, I got one little line I got to get out there. All right, that feels okay. Now, let me make a little explanation of what's going on here. Check my depth first. Oh shoot, I can go deeper than that. We'll take it a little deeper. Several things are happening here all at once. First of all, let me take my glove off so you can see what's happening with my left hand. They're easy to get on.
If you're actually a biker, you just bite them off with your teeth.
Right. I actually saw my kid do that once. I thought it was the silliest thing in the world. Okay, now, first of all, I'm not focusing on the edge cutting the wood when I'm making these cuts. What I'm focusing on instead is the bevel stroking the curve. Because the bevel moving along that surface is basically a reflection of how my body's moving, which is in response to where my feet are and if my knees are unlocked. Because if my knees are locked, I can't make the turn. I'll get a certain distance into it and I'm stuck, and then I got to come over here and go a little bit more and then over here and finish it off if I can do it in thirds. So instead, I try and keep my knees limber. But the problem is, if I'm gripping the shaft up here, like so, my knees will automatically lock up to support me because there's tension in this hand. And I don't want tension in my hand. So what I do instead is I take my thumb and I bring it up on top, and automatically my knees will unlock underneath me. It's a wonderful thing. My daughter is an acupuncturist and she can explain it to me. But I don't understand it, but I know it works, all right? So when I'm going through this cut, I want to be as mobile as possible through my legs so that I can move from vertical over this leg to vertical over this leg as I go through the cut. And if I can do that, then I can get these really nice volumetric curves going on with my forms. If I'm inhibited in some form, usually because my feet are too close together or my knees are locked, then I'll create a series of facets in order to be able to make the turn. And I'll simply have to sand those out. Now you could do it with a bowl scraper, and a nice wide bowl scraper, you could come back on it. But my experience is with green wood, in particular, when the bowl scraper comes up the surface, it starts tearing up the fibers on the opposing sides because the fibers in green wood are obviously still elastic and malleable, unlike real fine-grained hardwood would be. So my objective then, again, is to stroke that curve with the bevel as I'm going down the surface, knowing that if I'm moving okay, and I get to some area that's thicker, the gouge will immediately begin the cut. And the bevel will simply define the curve as the edge itself gets away and moves the wood away from in front of it. So I know the edge is going to do its job. I don't have to worry about that. I'm just considering what the bevel feels as it's going through the material in the same way that my hand or my fingers feel that surface as I stroke it with the pads of my fingers. So as I'm making this cut, it's critical to try and reduce the amount of tension in this left hand. So the first thing I do is I bring my thumb up on top with my fingers. The second thing I do is I don't grab the shaft, I open my fingers up. And the last thing is I bring my hand back here so that when I do get to the end of the cut, I'm not threatened by the rim. It'll be particularly important later on when I do the natural edged bowl. This one's bad enough. A lot of times you get these sharp edged bowls, and it's not a whole lot of fun. In fact, I did cut myself when I was up in the mountains back in the 70s here. And the doctor gave me a funny look when I went into the office because it was right across there. It wasn't with a gouge. I had a strip of sandpaper I was sanding, and that was before they had good sandpaper. Everybody cut their sandpaper in strips and like that, and I hit the hard edge and went right through it. It wasn't a lot of fun. Okay, so let's make a couple more cuts down there. And in order to do that, again, I'm going to get on the bevel. Now the cut is going to be down here where I have to reduce it, but I'm not going to start the bevel there. I'm going to start the bevel up here and feed into that thicker cut. involved in the same volume of space. Okay, that's getting a little heavy, so let me turn it into rubber. Broken the curve of the double. I should be getting an entrance there. Yeah, I need to address this edge a little bit.
David, it kind of looks like you're at the limit of, anyhow, the tool and the limit of the depth of bowl you could be doing that hammer.
For this?
Yeah.
Well, only, actually, no, I could go deeper. If I, in other words, as long as my ferrule doesn't hit the tool rest, then I'll be okay. But you're talking about down in here from the tool rest itself?
Well, more that the angles are getting to the point where you hit the rim before you would get much deeper or much steeper.
Okay, you mean here?
Yeah.
Oh, with my hand.
Well, not with your hand, but with the tool itself.
Oh, to this point. Okay, now I'm sorry, I didn't pick it up on it. Yeah. If I'm in a situation, what he's talking about, where you may not be able to see, where I get to a certain distance down there, it's possible for the shaft itself to hit the rim of the bowl. In which case, you want to go to what I call an 85-degree gouge, or a finishing gouge. In effect, you take a standard old, any kind of bowl gouge, heavy weight, like this, 5/8, and you put an 85-degree angle on the end of it. And that way, when you're down in those regions, especially if you have a deep bowl that comes in like that, then your shaft will be at this angle here to the wood, whereas the 60-degree angle that I'm working with, the shaft is over here near the rim. So you're obviously, correct on that. But in fact, you can, if you go to the Packard catalog or to the Craft Supplies catalog, go to the bowls gouge section and look carefully through there, and you will find the off-brand gouges, not the Sorbies or the Crowns or the Henry Taylors or something. And it's called a half-inch diameter. It's called a half-inch gouge, but it's 5/8 of an inch in diameter, meaning it's half-inch measured across here. And they're $59.95. It's a real good buy. And just put an 85-degree angle there on that thing. It'll last you the rest of your life because you almost never use it. But it's a great finishing gouge. Okay. Last cut. Who said comfortable? And the last thing about cutting in the center of the bowl is the little nib at the bottom. And it's a classic problem of getting a little nervous when you get down to the very end and you kind of dig for it, which you want to avoid because it'll put a little divot in the bottom, and then you have to recut the whole bowl to get down to the bottom of that divot. Usually when you get there, you create another divot, pretty soon you got a hole in the bottom of your bowl. So what I do instead is try and emphasize that that nib in the middle is simply one more spot on the entire curve of the bowl. So there's no reason to treat it any differently than you would any other location on the bowl itself. Meaning that you got down to the nib by staying on the bevel, just stay on the bevel and cruise right through the nib and it'll be gone. It's very easy. Just slow the cut down as long as your tool rest is at the right height, so that when the tool's level, you're right on it. You should be able to just slow the cut down, stay on the bevel, and keep the body moving microscopically, so to speak, to the left as you go forward with the tool, and that'll prevent you from cutting a flat surface. Now let's measure the wall thickness, just to make certain that I'm getting what I want here. Okay, it's nice and even down there, that's fine. And it's about 3/8 of an inch thick. It's a little rich right in here. Let's take that down one more time. Always make the last cut. In fact, let's take the whole thing down.
rests so that you don't have that
Yep.
extension that you're trying to.
Curved rests are wonderful for that. Robust makes a really nice one that has a hardened steel rod on the top of it, like all their tool rests. It's really a good one to work with. All right, that's not the best I've ever done, but we'll leave it at that point. I want to, so we can get on with it. I was picking up some vibration in there that I didn't like, but can't have everything. Okay, that puts me 1/4 of an inch above the chuck jaws. And we'll leave that there. And then, I'll make some lines on here when I get it on the jam chuck, which we're actually going to use. I wonder if I could grab my little chuck with that and make a jam chuck out of it. I bet I could. Oh, delicious.
Yeah, I have the pins removed, so you can go a little further than you're supposed to.
Smart man, thank you. Now, what I've got here for a jam chuck is kind of an oddball. Let me take it out and I'll explain it to you. Out of all the different jam chucks that we've had over the years, this turns out to be the simplest and the least expensive and the most versatile. And that is you get a Beal tap out of the catalogs. And you take a piece of wood, drill a hole in it, and thread the hole with the tap. Taps are about 30 bucks a piece plus shipping, probably about $37. At any rate, you're going to use one tap to make 100 jam chucks if you need to. And then I thread that hole, and then I thread it onto the spindle, and then I turn the chuck itself. I've got another one over here that I brought. This is just 2 pieces of walnut put together because I needed a deeper chuck so that I could get a taller form onto the lathe. And when you're making a jam chuck, all you need is a thick wall and a radius on the end of it. And then what I've added on here is a piece of Wonder Foam or Super Foam or Funny Foam, I think they call it. You can get it at Michael's craft store or any place. I think even Ace Hardware has it if they have a craft section to it. The kids love it, you know, they use all sorts of different things. In fact, that's why it's purple. The kids selected it, the little kids. It's the next generation now, in other words. And it has sticky back on it, so it just stick on the rim and then stick it on and trim it off with your skew and you've got a nice chuck. And you can use it for vacuum now. Coat the outside surface with super glue. If you're familiar with that, I know you are, it's that insulated foam they use on electronic equipment. It's very thin, white in color, creamy white in color, and it's closed cell foam. Just buy a VCR, you'll get lots of it. And use that as a jam chuck on here. But the nice thing about it is that super glue won't stick to it, so you can use it as a spreading pad. Just dribble the super glue on the foam and spread it onto the outside surface of the chuck. And then spray it with the activator or accelerator. And you suddenly have a sealed surface for using jam chucking. But then take that thing and throw it away immediately because you can't see the super glue on it. If you set it on a counter, I guarantee you're going to find it later. So, at any rate, you're welcome to look at these things at any time, of course. I forgot to measure. Oh, no, I did measure it down. Good. Let's put this back in. Now, one of the things that I did this evening was I brought my own tailstock center. And thanks to someone here, we also have a number 3 to number 2 Morse taper conversion tube here, because these all come in number 2, at least the ones that I have. And I buy these from Craft Supplies USA out in Provo. They're the only one that imports them from Nova in New Zealand, where they're made. They have an excellent bearing. I've run them in my school for 23 years now, and I had a few of them before then, so I can attest to their longevity. But they have different tips that you can buy, and there's a set screw here that you can remove for doing different things on your turnings. I think they're about 68 bucks for the center itself and $7 or $8 for each of the tips. So you can get what you want. What I'm interested in is a cup that has a tiny point sticking out, because in order to get this bowl centered on the chuck, I need to sometimes, if not always, I need to make subtle adjustments on it. And if I have a center this point is sticking out of there more than 1/8 of an inch, it's not going to do me any good. Because I need to sometimes just move the bowl, maybe a paper thickness on there, and I've got to be able to have that flexibility. So I'm going to use that here, bring the bowl up, bring the tailstock up here. Now I've got the imprint left on here from before. It's a little ragged, so I don't want it to break away on us. Let me just cut that off of there and broaden it out so it's a little stronger and there are no torn fibers on it. And I'm going to put this intentionally out of round so I can show you how to get it in the round. I don't want to measure to the rim of the bowl because that could already be distorted from just working it. So I want to measure to this surface here, which was concentric to the chuck and therefore to the lathe. And I simply put my thumb on the tool rest away from that surface a little bit and hand rotate it until it comes to me. So the high spot, in other words, comes to me. And it's off about 1/16 of an inch. And that high spot is right there. So I'll bring that forward, push up against the rubber on the chuck, back this off a hair, and in this case, it's such a small amount, I'm just going to push against the side of that point a little bit. I'm not even going to back the point away from the wood. I'm just going to push it up against the side of it. And now I'm closer. Same thing. Now I'm going to have to back off a hair more. Ooh, I moved it too far. I know it. Yep. Went to the opposite side. Oh, I see what the problem is. I wonder if my track isn't. Let's see what that looks like. Not good. I think what's happening is the chuck itself on the, my chuck on this chuck is not accurate on the edge, so I'm going to take it off.
Do you have a piece of foam?
Hmm?
Do you have a piece of foam?
Well, that is foam. Actually, no, I do. Oh, yes, I do too. I do over
Because
here.
I usually close the jaws and just put the foam right on the jaw.
I've done that as well, and I could here.
Assuming you have the clearance.
Yeah, but I want to knock this down because the natural edge bowl is going to be deeper, and I'm afraid that the wings might touch that as well. Yeah, I've done that as well. We'll just add some interesting color to the building too. Let's see if that works. a definite hot spot. It's got one of those nights. Well, that's closer. It's not where I want it to be. I'm just going to go ahead with it. I'm giving you an opportunity to show you one other thing.
Are you going to lock it?
Yeah, no, I want you to lock this.
Then can we point it toward, I'm going to point it toward me?
How's that?
That just want to point it toward me so the camera can see straight through.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Thank you.
Is I'm going to make a spot, a line here, which is the inside surface brought out here where I can see it. And then I'm going to add a little bit more for the wall thickness that I'll end up with in the bottom of the bowl. And that'll be right here. It's a little hard for you to see because of the jaw stuff on here. You can see it right here. And that's an arbitrary distance. I'm going to put it about 5/16. And then I'm going to add a little bit more for a foot down here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this plane up to the level of that third pencil line, dead flat. And that surface, somewhere on that surface, will be the foot of my bowl. And then I'm going to shape it, the bottom of the bowl, by taking the remainder of that step and this step completely away. In other words, I'm going to cut those two steps out of there. And when I do that, I'll miss this notch down in here, which was the inside surface of the jaws. If I had been on a faceplate with screws, I would be missing, in other words, the screw tips also, and cutting those out in this process. So I'm just going to float the shape down until it descends off at that point right there. And then I'll undercut it by that 1/8 of an inch, and I'll still be left with the 5/16 in the center of the bottom of the bowl. So it starts with measuring the depth of the bowl and bringing it out here where I can see it. Then I add a wall thickness, and then I add something to for a foot. And then I go backwards and I cut away until I have what I want. And then in terms of location. And it gives me the freedom, in other words, of shaping the foot and locating the foot wherever I'd like it to be. All determined on the depth of the interior. And the depth of the interior is kind of determined on the consistency of the wall going through the form. If the wall's inconsistent, or if the foot's way up here, I mean if the wall interior is way up here, then I've got a huge amount to play with down here, which I don't need. But in this case, we'll trim it up, starting with the initial stage of getting rid of the bolt, the extra that I don't need. And that's only about an 1/8 of an inch. And then I'm going to come in with the fifth cut that I talked about earlier, and that's a scraping cut. And what I do for the scraping cut is simply drop the blade down so that the top edge of the wood is about a 1/16 of an inch away from the surface of the wood. So it's not touching, obviously. In fact, if it did touch, nothing would happen because the wood's going away from it as it goes by. So I drop the blade, and this is now a scraping cut, and it's extremely valuable because I can not only use it for faceplate work, but I can use it for a glue block if I want to put a glue block on there. Then I only have a little bit to trim off with a hand plane when I'm gluing an extra block to that. So I simply come down and I drop the blade like that, and I go back and forth on it, and I can flatten it out very nicely. Not very efficient, but very, very important. Then I'll take a slicing cut with the tip of the tool and get rid of these extra high spots. There's 2 steps. And then we run into an interesting situation here, where the old surface is out of ground slightly, and the new surface is concentric to the lathe. How do you blend them together? And one way is to turn the speed of the lathe down to about 100 RPM. And when I put the gouge up to the wood on the old surface, the gouge is going to float. It's going to go woo, 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 like that, but it will follow the surface all the way around. In other words, I'm not recutting it. But when I go forward over the threshold, it will take that step between the two and ferret out. So I can then sand that through and you won't notice it's there. So I use the shear scraping cut. So here's what it looks like on the old surface. As I go forward, right here, I cross that threshold, and you see immediately how the gouge settles down onto the new surface. So here's the old, and then the new. Right there. Now it's not perfect, but it's close. Closer than I had been before. So now I have this area down here to deal with. So I'll keep going with the shear scraping cut in the backwards position to clean up those fibers. And then I made a radius on the rim up there, so let me make a nice little radius down here. Then we'll undercut this a little bit. Clean that down. And then last, I'm going to take a detail bar because I can't fit my big gouge down in there. And this is simply a 3/8" diameter spindle turning bar. And what I've done to it is I've cut the heel of the bevel off and smoothed it out into a nice even roll all the way up to the edge, the bottom of the shaft all the way around like that. And then I don't have this sanded here because I did it off of a grinder before I came down here, but ordinarily I would sand that surface to about 400 grit using a stiff-backed rubber backing, not a soft back, because a soft back, as the edge of the sandpaper goes, as the sandpaper goes over the edge, it'll fold it over. But a stiff back will keep it crisp. And then you can get a razor edge on there, really, really nice. But the nice thing also is that without the heel of the bevel, you don't get compression rings on the undersurface of here to have to sand out. Which, if I back up a little bit and talk about the finishing gouge, or the finishing cut with the gouge, if you take this edge down at the bottom of the heel of the bevel, in the area that's going to be touching the wood when you make the finishing cut on the inside of the bowl, if you sand that down and soften it up, you won't have those compression rings on the inside of the bowl either, and then you don't have to sand those out. Because a lot of times your cuts are quite nice, but you get these concentric rings going all the way down. You say, yeah, what and all that, and they're hard to get out. And they're created by the heel of that bevel as you're going in.
What about a secondary bevel on that?
A secondary bevel is fine, but it does exactly the same thing. It has an edge that is microscopic. I mean, it's much smaller than this, but it still has a junction between two facets, and that's an edge, basically. So I just sand it. Because what a secondary bevel does is it creates more support for the edge by coming in at a steeper angle. A skew, for instance, we don't put a second bevel on a skew because we want it to cut real, real fine, real sharp into the material. But a lot of times you'll take a bowl gouge and you'll put it on something like, say, a Wolverine Verigrind, and you'll create a bevel on there, and then you put a secondary bevel on it. Well, an 85-degree gouge is simply the second bevel the whole way, you see. So it's really no mystery behind it. So we'll trim that stem down now, taper it, then get on the bevel, and guide the bevel down on the surface, and then empty the material like that and cut a concave here. Then taper that stem down again, get on the bevel and take it down, last track, turn the machine off and just advance that forward, and it should, there we go, cut right through that thing. To finish that off. Well, I'll tell you one thing. I do apologize. It's not the best bowl I've ever done during a demonstration, but at least it's a bowl. We'll do better in the second one. Surface is a little uneven. And I did have trouble getting it centered on the bottom, which is why we've got this change in the surface, but at least it gave me a chance to show you that fading cut on there. And whoever gets this in your club, you're going to have to do some sanding on it to get it to be really, really right. I apologize again for that, but what the heck. It is wood turning. And I just wanted to do the best I could. Okay, we're going to take a short break. I just also wanted to do a little housekeeping myself, and the fact that when I do these tours, I bring loot with me. I got lots of loot here. I've got sharpening jigs, I've got gouges, I've got hollowing tools, I've got DVDs, and I've got some books. And with the exception of the gouges, which I have to pay shipping from England and still sell them at retail price here, I take 15% off of whatever I make from Europe acquisitions and give it back to your club so that you can bring more characters like me here. So it's kind of a win-win-win situation. So if you're interested, I'll be happy to help you with during or after the break. The gouge